Welcome back, everyone. We're here for Talk Openly, Lions Roar Dharma Center's podcast show. I'm Jac, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Daniel. And we are joined tonight by our friend, Matthew Kruse, who, among many things, is the founder and massage therapist at Noble Hearts Massage in Sacramento. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, Jac. Hi, Daniel. Thanks so much for having me on. It's good to be here with both of you and our listeners.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I know we're going to have a really great topic of conversation tonight. We're going to be talking about embodied kind of somatic practice. And I think you're the perfect person to talk with about that. So thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. I'm not sure how much expertise I have in that field, but it's definitely been a huge part of my practice. So
Great.
if I can share and we can discuss that, it's always a pleasure to me.
Yeah.
Heck,
Yeah.
it's
No, I
always a
think.
pleasure just getting to hang out with you, Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna
Been
say Jack could have just ended it as Matthew is the perfect person and then just left it at that.
so kind. Three perfect people hanging out.
Hell yeah. Well, Daniel, what do you think about firing up the Lojong slogan generator?
Heck yeah, we can jump right in, and I
Yeah,
think we're probably gonna have a good random Lojong slogan here right off the bat. I'm sure
so
of it.
Matthew, I'm sure you know we every show we use the Lions Roar Dharma Center random Lojong slogan generator to discuss a Lojong slogan. And oftentimes it's somewhat topical to our conversation and
Yeah, and
lives.
then
Usually,
when we're like, oh my God, we're gonna get a topical one, then we don't get
then
one.
we don't.
Yeah. So
The rare time.
it's truly
Yeah.
random. It's as random can be, but I'm gonna hit the big orange button and get us a slogan up here. Mm, all right.
All right. Let's see here. Number 57, don't react impulsively with anger or irritation. And Charlotte Cabgon says it's not necessary to always react impulsively, allowing our instinctual responses to get the better of us. We tend to think anger is empowering, but recurrent anger only has a toxic effect on our mind and body and gradually reduces our self esteem so that we feel more vulnerable, threatened, and prone to pervasive feelings of insecurity.
That's a fascinating take on it, don't you think? That anger
Hmm.
eventually gives way to feelings of insecurity. I don't know that I've ever really thought about it in that sense, but I definitely get that feeling like, oh yeah, anger, I get fired up, right? Like I feel powerful sometimes, but when I act on it or react to it rather, it usually causes problems. I've had recently a decent amount of practice with my little Chihuahua. He causes me endless endless amounts of suffering, mental anguish. And the other night, he woke me up in the middle of the night. I was all tired and stuff. He woke up, he was making all kinds of racket. And I got so mad. I was like, oh, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna teach that little chihuahua who's boss, you know? And then I had a moment because you know what we've been working on these four opponent powers, Matthew, of purification. And I was like, no, 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 I need to purify this anger. And I worked with it. And you know what was really cool? I just went right back to sleep and didn't bother the chihuahua whatsoever. So I was really pleased with that experience.
Nice work.
Yeah,
Excellent. Practice really works.
practice really works. I'm actually kind of curious as we get into the topic tonight if maybe we can weave this in there a little bit about because it's not just anger, right? But habitual reactivity. If there are ways that we can use the body or if there's a somatic approach to creating a gap between observation and action.
There it is.
Mm.
Just to kind of touch back, though, before we get started on that, when you were talking about and the quote talking about uh, reacting impulsively with anger or irritation leading to lower self-esteem, I think you touched on something really important, right? Like generally the result of that isn't positive.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have these negative experiences that we're going to begin to self identify with. And at least for me, that the only time I really allow myself to get angry, like really express anger, I'm coming from some position of um, self-appointed authority or judgment. And so inevitably, if I'm coming from that place where like I'm allowed to be angry at this situation or at this person, afterwards, I'm going to realize on some level that I was inflated to even go there. And so then I'm going to like feel bad about myself, right? So it's going to be this kind of like, instead of being in the middle, being above and then below.
Yeah, it's kind of it's embarrassing,
It's
and
embarrassing.
like to see ourselves that way, just like totally erodes um that kind of like, yeah, sense of goodness. Um, it's never gone, but it feels that way.
I'm curious though, I had this conversation this morning with somebody who has been trying to tell me, hey, when you're watching the news and you're hearing all kinds of things that make you feel angry and irritated, just chill, just chill. Like maybe, like you shouldn't be consuming so much news, et cetera, et cetera. But what was funny about it was just this morning they were like, now I'm pissed. There was a line. Now it's time. Now it's time. I'm angry, and there's a righteousness in that anger, and that has a place, and I think it's kind of interesting. It does, and there's nothing wrong with the current, the pure energy of anger, right? And it does seem to point to something, some sense of something not being okay. But I think the habitual part is the part that Matthew was talking about there, right? Which is that how we kind of wrap our own, like we filter it through our own sort of egoic framework, right? And have our judgments layered on top of that. But I think that the underlying emotion can be helpful if we can sit with it.
Certainly telling us something. Yeah, you're right.
Exactly.
Well, and Lama talks often about that we're not necessarily trying to eradicate anger. We're trying to prevent revenge. So the acting on it, right? The reacting impulsively, the
Right.
taking revenge, right? So anger is just a form of energy, and we can choose what to do with it.
Right. There's no Lojong saying that says, eliminate anger and irritation.
Shanti Deva might say that though. There's like there's different interpretations, right? So I think Shanti Deva is pretty like just don't get angry.
Yeah.
I
I
could
wish
be
I
I
think
could be
wrong.
more like him.
it depends on like what level of practitioner is being addressed.
Yeah.
For
Right. So
sure.
a high level practitioner maybe who's actually had the experience of emptiness in a really strong way, or of suchness, maybe doesn't want to get angry at all because they abide primarily in a state of peace and wisdom, where the rest of us, we're going to have to figure out how to use that energy.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess
I
there's
think
like the Hinayana kind of direction where it's like just really avoid it, right? Like don't even go there. And then there's the more kind of like, Tantrayana, like Vajrayana, like let's work with it type. Yeah. So who's this here?
This
it's
is
interesting too that it
Mm,
makes a comment on the impulsivity,
mm, mm-hmm.
right? So it seems to me too like there's an aspect of like, well, if we're in our right mind, like we're really, understanding the situation as best we can, which might mean, well, this news story upsets me, but I don't have a lot of context to it. Like I actually don't really know what goes on in Washington. Like there's a certain humility attached to that, that then we can be upset without becoming impulsive. It's not like such a strong force in the body that we act out
Mm.
prior to investigation or thinking, or honestly being able to sit in the body with that emotion, right? Like impulsivity implies to me that someone's reacting to an emotion without being with it. They're not really in an
Yeah.
embodied state with that emotion.
100%. I had an experience not too long ago where I was using the four opponent powers with anger, and so I sat with like some pretty extreme anger, and it felt overwhelming. It was lasting multiple days, like it felt super strong energy, and I sat with it, and it was really interesting. I talked about it on one of the shows with Jack, that it actually turned out to be, something where underneath it was a very sort of bittersweet soft heart that I didn't actually recognize initially. My initial reaction was this, what's described here as this sort of habitual impulsive reaction, which was to do something like, yeah, this is wrong and I need to act now powerfully to do something to correct a wrong. And instead of doing that, I really, really sat with it. And it was beautiful to see it sort of like not really transform, but really just to show itself fully. And what it really showed was something that was, in fact, yes, there was something that was bothering me, but underneath it was a real tender, soft sort of source of compassion. And I was surprised to discover that underneath anger.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I- I've heard of it talked about as being a secondary emotion because it has that protective quality. So the thing we don't like, it comes on so quickly and with such clarity that we don't even notice that there was a brief moment of vulnerability
Yeah.
before the anger flared.
I like that. Thanks, Matthew. I'm going to think about that a bit. It's a secondary emotion because something came up right before it, but we didn't notice it.
Something tender that needed protection.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
precisely. Huh. Mm.
Yeah, and I think something that comes up for me too is like the tenderness is like, or my vulnerability is that someone's going to find out that I'm like that I don't know, or that like that like I'm a fraud. That those are the things that I like get pissed off about, right? So it's not
Yeah.
even necessarily like a I'm a hurt thing. It's like, oh, you're going to find me out, so fuck you, like kind of. Um,
Defense.
right? Yeah, it's so bad. Or not me,
Mine's
but I'm working on it.
Mine's along the lines of what Matthew described. It's usually associated with some form of like righteous indignation, but that
Yeah,
righteous indignation is tied to my judgment. And the funny part is that actually I don't, in almost all instances, I don't know. I've just made up some story and now I'm pissed about it, and then I'm
yeah.
acting impulsively around that. It's all self-generated. And usually when I actually find out, more information about whatever the situation is, I'm like, oh, like you said, Jack, I'm like embarrassed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't
Hmm.
believe that I that I even felt that way, let alone that I acted on it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is like I feel like this slogan's a pretty good segue for tonight
Yeah,
of
I think
embodied
so.
practice, right? Like impulsivity and checking in, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, Daniel, you're showing this beautiful painting, and I just appreciate Dirk for putting all these up. It's really
Me
cool.
too. Me too. I have no idea who Lohan Immortal is, but I imagine that he has probably practiced for a long time with anger and other strong emotions.
Most likely, huh?
If he's immortal.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Let's get to it, yeah? Um, so Daniel, do you want to kind of introduce this topic for us?
Me? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, you're suggesting that because I mentioned Matthew talking a few weeks
Uh-huh.
ago. Yeah, yeah. All right, all right. Yeah, I have not had an embodied practice for much of my practice or training. And what little embodiment there is, whatever somatic aspect of practice I've been blessed with, has largely actually come from you, Matthew. And so I was talking about this the other day on the show about Having had some pretty, I wouldn't call them realizations, but some pretty strong, powerful experiences as a result of applying some things that you've mentioned to me over the years. One of them in particular, I don't know, I don't know exactly how you phrased it, but at one point I think you were leading a group meditation and you were encouraging us uh, to really tune into three different things that are always there. And correct me if I get them wrong, but this is how I took it. One was this our breath, right? So there we go. It's always there. So getting in touch and feeling the breath. But I thought it was really neat because you included also these countering forces. One was sort of the space above us with the gravity pulling us down and the support underneath us of like the ground, right? This sort of meeting where the sort of like the feeling, not just the body touching the earth, but rather this meeting of these two forces. And that's been that sometimes when I'm sitting, if I find myself distracted, I'll sometimes like flash onto that thought and I'll have that experience of just like coming in like, right, there's the breath, there's the support, there's that feeling of gravity kind of holding me, pulling me down. And so that's been really helpful among some other things as well that you've mentioned to me over the years or in group settings. So I really appreciate it. And I happened to be talking about that the other day, and Jack was like, "We should bring Matthew back on."
Yeah, thank you. I um my like I was actually studying Zen Buddhism before I got introduced to any somatic practices, and that was just highly, highly intellectualized. And um, being introduced to somatic practices um, has been extremely beneficial to me. And it took quite a while for me to begin having an embodied experience. And I am always surprised at different uh, times of challenge when I am required to enter into my body more deeply. And I think because I think like, oh, I thought I was embodied, but there's actually there's even a deeper experience of that. And um, I've always been fairly athletic or, into physicality and moving my body. So if somebody probably had said to me prior to doing somatic practices, like, well, are you embodied? I would have definitely thought that I was. So I think there's a lot of varying degrees, and it's really difficult to ever say uh, someone's disembodied. I mean, to actually be disembodied is a really, really extreme state. So we are embodied, actually, but it's like choosing to bring our awareness to the embodiment that's already there. I mean, for most people, right? And that the body is already inherently enlightened too and exists within the field of enlightenment. And so taking some time to try to have that experience and become more and more realized in that experience is embodiment, at least in the way I try to work with it. My So the first somatic practice I was taught and got into was called sensory awareness. And I was in a veterans group where that was a part of the veterans group. And so I would go to this veterans group for various reasons. And then throughout the day, we would do sensory awareness practice. And I remember it was just terribly uncomfortable for me. It felt like a waste of time. I didn't get it. And like, I was thinking like, so you do these things, or it's like, you kind of get in a very relaxed meditative state, maybe focus on breathing. There's a guide, so somebody's guiding you through stuff. And it'll be like, put your hand on your chest. Like, what do you what do you feel there? what's actually there at that meeting, and I just remember just being like, well, my hand's on my chest, like my hands on my chest, like, and the guy would always say stuff like, do you feel anything alive there? And I remember just thinking, like, man, this is like so woo woo. Of course, I feel something alive there. Like I'm a living being. And that is an example of a very cerebral state of embodiment, right? Like my whole relationship with my body was coming from a cerebral type place. And, it literally took years before one day I remember her saying, like, put your hand on the back of your neck. And do you feel anything live there? And, for whatever reason, like in that moment, I was open and relaxed enough to actually experience the heat and the prickle of hairs and softness and flesh and pliability in that flesh. When I pressed on it, it had firmness that bounced back when I lifted the pressure, and that there was that meeting, that alive meeting where pressure gave way and pressure gave to. And for me in that moment, it kind of opened up this bigger experience of being alive. And I think more importantly for me at that time, of having some self-compassion and some care that I deserved my own thoughtfulness, because this is a living being. So it was really important to me. So that's kind of, and then that just increased, because once I had that experience, it's kind of like, oh, well, I want more of this being alive thing,
Mhm.
and actually caring about being alive, because that transcends any idea of self, right?
Right.
Once if I'm truly caring that, like, that this is a living thing that's happening right here, then I can't help but notice that it's happening all out here too, with you and all the little critters and plants and everything.
Why do you think it is, Matthew, that so many of us have this experience that where you started from, right? That we feel so, we seem like life is so cerebral, and we're so into the psychological states, the mental, the like the thoughts and feelings and all of that, that we don't, that it's sort of surprising to have that kind of a realization like you're talking about, because on a simple level, even a 3-year-old could tell you, like, yes, I'm a living being, right? It seems simple, and yet it's profound to actually have that experience of really feeling alive. What do you think it is about our conditioning that leads to this sort of separation where we feel this sort of like we go up into our thoughts somehow and escape? I know, yes, we're embodied, but we're lightly embodied, minimally embodied. What do you think is going on there? Like, how do we get this way?
Thank you for asking that question, because that kind of framework of where we are and um, what we're working with to become embodied is so important in the beginning. The actually throughout, yeah, because it keeps coming up, So the teachers I've worked with have explained it in a few different ways. Um, the first is, we're in modern life, right? And so modern life has both a really fast pace. We're going through our day at incredible rates, because of digital technology. We're able to communicate really quick, nonstop. We're always plugged in. We're always getting information. We're always speaking, sending information. Because of vehicles and stuff, we're getting really far distances really fast, moving from place to place in like constant transition with these vehicles. And these vehicles also move at high rates of speed, and in places of high volume, there's a lot of like kind of dangerous activity going on. We're also moving into a lot of unfamiliar spaces. You know, ancient humans mostly knew everyone they came in contact with, were very familiar with the spaces that they moved through. You know, now even if I'm going to a coffee shop that I regularly frequent, it's going to be probably all different faces and humans within that coffee shop when I go in there, right? So the human organism is not really set up for these types of conditions, at least in terms of how we've evolved. So we're on a pretty consistent low grade adrenaline drip. You know, where maybe the way we've evolved was to be really like there would be no reason to be in an activated state most of the time until something actually happened that would make us need to fight, flight, freeze, etc. So since we're on that drip, our mind is racing. We're in a slightly traumatized space, which triggers our mind to try to figure it out, which is where it kind of meets with like the definition or reasoning given by Reginald Ray, who's a Vajrayana teacher who specializes in somatic practices, that you know the ego's job is to do that interface between totally raw primordial experience. If we were just open and had no conditioning yet, just absorbing everything, you know, we're probably like colors would seem extremely fantastic, because it would be like everything would be fresh, right? So that would make it also a bit hard to get by. So the ego's job is to kind of meet those things and filter and create conditioning in us to meet that without really being absorbing all that primal data that's just coming at us all the time. So if you look at like kind of those two explanations together, we have a little bit of an idea why it's a lot safer to be in our head and thinking about things and kind of moving from that space, as opposed to like being in our body. And
That's super insightful. That's
Mm.
super I that's helpful. I get it. It's it's actually so it actually kind of points to the fact that the need, the demand for these somatic practices is going to go up because the speed of society, all those things you mentioned, the speed is moving, it's going faster, faster, right? And people are feeling this like techno stress, if you will, or can call it anything, but it's a stress that you're talking about on the system. And so it seems like this is sort of perfect timing in the sense that you know, as the information age progresses and we get faster, better technology from, you know, cramming even more information, more news, you know, go further, faster, and all of that, that the need to sort of come back, right? There's a feeling of like, I always get this feeling whenever I practice anything like this of like coming down, right? Coming down, 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 and then sinking and getting like close to Earth, right? And I feel like, you know, the timing couldn't be better, that we could need this more now than ever.
Well, and Daniel, you mentioned that, so that like sinking down, that feeling that is almost maybe even a strategy of a somatic practice. And I'm wondering, Matthew, if you could share a little bit, like from for a beginner who maybe does feel disconnected from their bodies. What are some strategies or first steps to kind of cultivating greater presence and embodiment?
So to kind of differentiate before we jump in, one of the ways we can think about that is like left brain, right brain, right? So the idea being, and this is not absolute in any way, meaning the different hemispheres of the brain talk to each other and like assist. But in general, the left side of the brain, which controls the right side of the body, um, deals with things like the form world as we see it, definitions, logic, reasoning, explanation, strategy. So it's when we say we're in our head, what we're actually talking about is like that kind of like left brain mentality. So because both the right brain is deals with the body more in the sense that we're talking about, which would be more of a direct abstract experience beyond explanation or reason, something fresh. Um, so when we understand that that's the differentiation, we've learned to rely heavily on the strategizing logic side of it, um, to come into the place where we're having a direct experience of reality through the body. uh, it's important to kind of keep, well, what does that left side brain do, and see if we can encounter the experience of this moment without a lot of rationalizing or explaining. So like a little example of this would be, if somebody says to us like, oh, my wrist hurts, our first thing is like, what did you do? How did that happen? Right? So we go to this place of wanting to explain or become logical with the experience of the body. Like we're often really at a loss to meet ourselves or someone else just in that sensation, and then explore that sensation without creating a story around it. Right. But sometimes it will also, oh man, I'm not going to be able to do this and that with my wrist hurting, I'll never be able to get my work done. We go into these types of place, right? Instead of maybe just exploring like, well, what, the movement and how that affects pain. And like, if we rub it, if the pain will go away. So it's really important with somatic practices to try our best to be non-judgmental and not follow any sort of rule. Like really get out of any sort of like the way we're supposed to do it type mentality and explore. So there are practices, so that's kind of weird, right? Like, oh, well, we should do these particular practices, but they should never be done in a way as if like there's just one way to do it. It kind of needs to be an exploration, like what's there.
It's like there's a formal introduction that's like, yeah, you can do it like this and like this and like this, which is helpful, a guide, if you will. But then there's the actual implementation, which that guide is just saying like, yeah, there's something there's a way that you can approach this, and then you can go from there and explore on your own. Is that what you're suggesting?
It is, exactly. So like most of us have been the primary somatic practices that are given to us in meditation trainings are following the breath, so staying with the breath, and body scans. And so, we have a basic idea of how to do a body scan and how to follow breath. Um, so I would suggest like getting really playful with it, in in terms of like um, how you do it, and that playfulness. I think this is a tricky edge because we can get in our head about playfulness, right? It can become like this thing like, oh, I'm gonna watch me do it really playful. I'm so creative. I'm gonna like do some stuff. And when I say creative or exploratory, I mean more like being in that real place of um, allowing the experience to lead us without us trying to get anywhere. Like, and realizing that with the right side of the brain, there's nowhere to get. The body's gonna continue having an experience. The body's gonna continue sensing, no matter what we want it to do, or think where we think it's gonna go, or what we're gonna get out of it. Like that living is happening beyond any sort of um, conscious control.
Pretty amazing. Yeah. When really kind of like recognize that and can like bear witness to your own body. It's just incredible.
Don't you think though that there is a relationship in the sense that the um yeah, okay, so the right side's not going to go anywhere, but creating a story around the reason why your wrist hurts, right, could actually make it could increase your experience of discomfort or unhappiness around the event. So the body is going to keep doing what it's doing, but you could actually make it a lot worse.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, that's true. I saw a video about a person who was using a nail gun and somehow got a nail like into their brain, like up through their nose, just in an accident. They like fell, and and they didn't know, and they were like for several days were going about their normal everyday business, but like started to feel like they were having a headache, and like it was kind of a weird headache, so they went in to the doctor and got an x-ray, and then there was a nail in like their head. So I think that's totally right. It's like if he had known that, right, the story would have been like, oh my god, like what if, how is this happening, et cetera, et cetera. But he just went about his everyday life not knowing. It's incredible.
It is incredible. The power of the mind, huh?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'm curious. So, you mentioned earlier about the body being um, a way that we can get to liberation, and I'm curious about that. Like, because I'm a very cerebral person, and I think one of the reasons I was attracted to Buddhism is that it felt very like scientific, rational. And as I've been getting more into my practice, I'm realizing just how important my physical body is. And so could you say more about like the body as a kind of a vehicle for liberation, for awakening? If you feel comfortable. I know maybe that's I don't know if that's a llama level question.
That's, I mean, that's probably a long level
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
It seems to me
The,
like maybe you may have suggested something along those lines earlier when you were talking about the body, does exist in the enlightened field, that the body itself is already enlightened, and that feeling that you had of having self-compassion. It's one of the, if we're wanting to develop wisdom and compassion, um, being able, especially for Westerners, to develop some compassion for this living thing right here, which we oftentimes view with disdain, loathing, all kinds of other feelings, sometimes great pride, other kinds of strong attachments to body. It seems like that could be partially the answer to the question, right, about how it can be used on the path to enlightenment.
Well, and
Definitely.
maybe to also add on to that question and inquiry is um, how the body can be a reminder of the middle way, right? That the Buddha discovered, which is that it's, we don't want to go to hedonism and pleasure. We also don't want to go to the opposite of like asceticism and denying. And so the body is being kind of a reminder of that middle way practice.
Definitely. And how we care for it, right? It's like constantly informing us where the middle is and when we've gone to extremes on the material plane.
My belly's doing that right now. It's like, hey, dude, too much of that sensual desire right there. It's telling me, it's like loud and clear.
Yes. The second brain, the belly.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
there's something interesting too going on there where if I if I consider really deeply interdependence, um, and also this idea that there's a misapprehended individual I existing, then it seems like the experience of body really begins to lend itself to awakening to those things because like if I'm in out in the cold, this body becomes cold. Like there's I really want to pretend like there's a separation
Hmm.
between wind and me, but actually we're interrelated, and like if somebody I have strong feelings about suddenly walks into a room, like I have distinct experiences from their presence in my body also, so I do think that there's a lot there when we care to listen that starts showing us some of these theories in real time and in an experiential way.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
What do you see, Matthew, when you're working with people, either, in mindfulness practice or in any type of therapy where you're providing assistance, that where do you notice this biggest challenges for people when they are coming into contact with their bodily sensations and they're kind of waking up to their bodies? Like, what are the biggest sort of obstacles or challenges that people face when that begins to happen? And then what kind of advice do you give them for continuing on moving past that?
When that begins to happen, my limited sense um, is that people are happy to be involved in the journey, even if discomfort is present, because the depth of the experience and wanting to listen to what the body is saying becomes much more fascinating than maybe being in a comfortable state all the time. Prior to that, though, there's a lot of fear and tension So I think the primary exercise to begin is always to relax, like some sort of what I call active relaxation practice, um, meaning somewhere quiet, likely alone. It's going to be boring. Actually taking time to tend to muscle tension. Where are you holding tension and how do you release it? How does that muscle that's holding tension unconsciously actually melt the tension away and become soft again? And really going through the body and exploring. And at first, that might take physical palpation. You know, what on me is pliable and what is flexed for no good reason. The majority of people are in a state of brace, right? They're bracing because they're just receiving so much new information and stuff all the time. The body doesn't uh, have a strategy, and it is difficult because as we relax the body, there's a lot of sensation that before we didn't have to deal with, right? So a whole new world opens up, and it's gonna slow us down. It's gonna make us more sensitive. It's gonna bring up subtleties that we didn't have to deal with before. Um, so it it makes sense that those things are there, but when I talk about that, like I don't see those things as a hindrance or something to be avoided because the world needs that, right? Like this is what we need for each other, is that level of like, hey, I actually have to go slower. I'm tired. I keep tensing up. You know, I have to slow down so that I can process the relationship with my environment. And that's, you know, becoming paramount in my awareness, how to meet it, and that I want to do it in a way where I can remain as soft as possible, as open as possible, and that gentleness and that openness is directly related to how we hold tension in the body.
That's almost exactly what we talked about with the Lojong slogan, right? With anger and that being this kind of bracing emotion, right? We don't want to receive whatever we feel is coming our way. We're trying to defend, and so that kind of that tension is like that bracing, not wanting to receive, wanting to push off, and underneath is all this, vulnerability, right? The softness of our bodies, um, how very close we are to death all the time, right? We're it's just this constant kind of struggle. And so yeah, I have a hard time releasing tension. um but I know that it's such an important practice. So it's just interesting to hear that about like the anger and tension. They're very related. And I imagine you see a lot of people who come in with both, right? I certainly do in my therapy practice.
Yeah,
What do you,
and me, right? Like I notice that like if I'm feeling irritated, there's something going on, right? Like I'm clenching my shoulders or I'm holding my hand like this or I'm, doing things. I'm holding that tension somewhere. And if I come back to my body and say, no, I'm not gonna be tense in my body right now and actually work on my relaxing those specific muscle groups, my mind relaxes right along with it.
Mm.
It's so helpful.
what would you, Matthew? I sometimes find myself, whether it's like with family or friends, where, some people will say, "Oh yeah, I'm so tense. I feel so anxious right now," and I'll thinking I'm doing a good thing, I'll say, "Oh, hey, try to see if you can get your breath down lower into your belly, just see if that helps. Like, I'll try something just super gentle like that. But that's oftentimes even that as a suggestion is maybe too much and comes across as something, oh, Daniel, you're meditating, whatever. But, like, what can we do for each other? Let's like if someone says that they are tense and anxious or feeling stressed, what's like the simplest sort of, like, maybe it's not even advice. You know what I mean? Like, maybe
Yeah.
there's something that we modeled. Maybe there's something that we do, some little something to just help, just help the person embody, become a little bit more embodied. What is it? What would you say? Like the simplest thing we could do?
Those moments.
Yeah, for the other, right? What can we
I
do for
mean,
them?
if they're, I mean, so I would say if you really want to work in terms of being embodied like that, that language with that other person has to be established in a safe place first. Um, or else it's probably not going to land well. And if we haven't done that, I always think it's best to probably commiserate people, to at least some extent. Like people, I think, feel very unheard.
Yeah.
So just being heard and knowing that their experience has been validated can be really helpful in relaxing the body.
Oh, that's such a great answer. I need to hear that again and again and again. Like that right there, just holding space and validating people is sometimes the simplest, most powerful thing that we could possibly do. I struggle with that though.
In the
I always
speaking,
want to
because
get in and
actually
fix it,
you do it really well.
Aw,
You
thanks,
do it
man.
really naturally. Yeah.
I'm working on it, but man, I'm telling you, my natural habitual reactive self is like, all right, well, now you need to do this and you need to do that. And if you do this other thing,
We're
Matthew
gonna
tells
fix
me
it.
you just need to feel gravity and
Fix
feel
you
the
up.
space, you'll be all right.
Yeah. Just holding space. Well, and I think another part of that too, part of holding space is how like we are holding our own bodies, right? When speaking with someone. And so if I can notice like when I'm receiving kind of someone's pain through their words or whatever it is, if I can relax my body and kind of model like what a relaxed, open posture, attentive but relaxed. I find we have those mirror neurons, right? We want to mirror one another. And so oftentimes that will happen where if I'm relaxed, someone else is going to turn down their kind of tension a little bit too.
Oh my gosh, I love that. The mirror neuron thing is absolutely true, right? And
Mhm.
it's something that Lama told me. I remember asking him, early on, like, "Oh my gosh, Lama, I want to tell everybody. What do we do?" And, like, yeah, how do I teach people? How do I show them this stuff that's so amazing? And he was like, "You just do it yourself." You just you don't need to tell anybody anything. Just do the practice yourself, and that's enough. But also one thing I'm reminded of, I'm lucky enough, I got to participate in something known as was called the Men's Adventure Club recently, led by our dear friend Matthew here. It was a little outing with a few guys from within the Sangha, and as part of that, one of the exercises, one of the experiences, involved extended hugging. And I gotta say, that was a novel experience that I know from speaking with some of the other adventurers was quite informative. And I think surprisingly so, that our connection with each other, whether not necessarily just hugging, even holding, just like a light gesture of touching, right? Some type of physical touch. Again, granted, it must be in a safe space and it would be appropriate and all that, right? But that's another one of those things that can be really helpful. Sometimes just a touch or a hug or a hand on the shoulder, something like that, can be really, really helpful at sort of like removing some of that strong energy.
We're
Definitely. Yeah.
a touch starved culture.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we are.
And we do. There is this term called a lightning rod too, which is unfortunately it's actually in a dysfunctional family, but like one of the people in the family, their job will be they'll take the negative energy from the other members of the family, generally through
Yeah.
touch, and like ground it, right? So they're like a lightning rod.
Yeah. I don't think that does that. I mean, I can appreciate that maybe that the phrase is coming from the context of dysfunctional families, but I certainly see that as a possible role, right? As a way, like even the holding space that we're talking about, even without the physical touch, can be a way of disseminate. How do you say it? Diffusing the energy a little bit, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a powerful role to play, right? To help people diffuse that a bit.
Yeah, I think it's very courageous, and just hope that it's done with a lot of self-compassion and awareness with how much energy that person actually has to take on. And
It's like a capacitor in an electric circuit or something. You got to have the capacity, right? Otherwise you'll blow.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Matthew, in the last minute or two, any last words or kind of encouragements you can offer us and the viewers on just becoming more in touch with our bodies?
Do your best to treat yourself well, relax, and thanks so much for having me on and letting me talk about something that's really near and dear to my heart. Appreciate
Mm,
you both very much.
You're deeply appreciated as well, Matthew. Thank you for joining us.
yes, this was lovely. Much appreciation. All right, y'all. If we'll see you next week. But in the meantime, make a donation to lionsroaddharmacenter.org. We'd super appreciate it. Otherwise, see y'all later.
Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.